You're watching a follow-up Friday for the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast, episode 63 with Alan Fadling. I'm Chris Lamberth.
And I'm Josh Havens. So this week, we talked with Alan about his book that just released, The Way of Presence. It's just summarize real quick. It's a 60-day short little consumable pieces of reading that are meant to guide you into an understanding of practicing the way of Jesus. And he opens the book with a quote from Eugene Peterson that I think is really amazing. You have to go listen to the podcast for the full quote or get the book. I will summarize the most important line, though. The way of Jesus, divorced from the truth of Jesus, does not lead to the kind of life that Jesus led. We have to have the way and the truth and the life. It's all one big package. So yeah, that sounds really simple, but I think digesting it and actually putting it into practice is going to take a lifetime. Really, it's what creating a lifestyle of discipleship is all about. We're trying to become more like Jesus. We're trying to follow our master, be his apprentices, be his followers in every moment of life.
Yeah.
Whether it's doing the most mundane things that we do every single morning, or whether it's those mountaintop experiences that come along once in a lifetime where we look back and say, yeah, that was a life-defining moment. No matter what the situation, we're trying to learn to live our lives the way that Jesus would live our lives if he were living it.
Yeah. And yeah, that sounds simple to say, much like Jesus talking to the rich young ruler. It's simple. Oh, well, all you got to do is, obey all the laws and, then sell everything you have and follow me. Like, okay, well, that's simple. But when you actually get down to the nitty gritty of how, like, what your wake up in your morning routine actually is, well, just sometimes, let me take Jesus out of it for a second. Don't clip that. Your mornings can be extremely complicated when you, like in my case, I wake up and find that my 2-year-old son has crawled out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and is eating all of the strawberries out of the refrigerator and hasn't shut it. And so everything is starting to go bad. And it's like, okay, all of a sudden my morning just got really complicated. And yet it sounds real simple that Jesus is with me in that moment. So how does my life...
What's that mean?
That's right. How do I reflect Christ in that moment? A very important moment to reflect Christ in. And then where do I see him in that moment as well? Not just that, he's still waiting in my prayer closet for me to get to him so I can, finally open my Bible and read and pray, but he's with me in the kitchen as I'm trying to clean up stuff and react appropriately to my son.
Yeah. I think back to our conversation with Trisha Rhodes, Sacred Chaos. Sometimes as parents, we get so caught up in the chaos of the moment, we think that God's not in the chaos anymore. And it's really the place where he wants to still meet us.
Yeah.
Recognizing that we are humans, we are limited in what we can do, and sometimes those limits are pushed by little toddlers.
Yeah, exactly.
And somehow he still wants to meet us there.
That's right. And that's just an example of how simple it is to say, we're learning to follow Christ in every aspect of our lives, the everyday moments of our lives. And yet that becomes, that takes a lot of work for us to learn how to do it as we integrate Jesus into our lives. And I don't even think integrate's a good word, because again, it means that we're still trying to find a way to put him in. And maybe that is what we're doing, but really it should be it really should be like if we're watching a movie, we just take the movie out and we put another one in, and it's a new movie of our life in Christ. Like everything, this is what it means to be born again, is everything is started over. We are these new creations in Christ. And yet it doesn't feel like that. And so we are trying to walk and learn imperfectly what it means to follow this way, the way of the Master, the way of Jesus, in a way that accurately reflects his character, his nature, and who he is.
And I just want to reinforce something that we didn't really talk about on the podcast, but we've talked about before, we've mentioned it before. We expect those things to happen overnight or in an instant. We have to recognize that growth like that takes time. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lifetime. And the reason I bring this up is because I think the most important piece that I gleaned from the conversation was the discussion about spiritual disciplines or practices. When it comes to fostering an awareness of God's presence, we're learning to live the Jesus way. Spiritual disciplines and practices become an important part of that. Like we talked about in the podcast, these practices are there to call us back when we start moving away, which we all do all the time. And it's a constant, you think back to the old song, Prone to Wander, Lord, I Feel It. Our hearts are prone to, just like little kids, walk off randomly in different directions at different times. And we see that all throughout the Old Testament. We see that all through the New Testament still.
Yep.
And that's just the reality of living in the world in which we live.
Yep.
And spiritual practices exist to help us pull ourselves back. They're a call back to relationship with God where he continues to shape us and form us. And those spiritual practices do not change us overnight or in an instant. They're meant to be the long haul, the long game, where we practice them day in, day out, and we gradually begin to see things change.
Yeah, the spiritual practices are our way of walking in the grace that Jesus offers us so that we can accept the truth of the new reality in which we live. And that's a callback to the episode of this truth in grace. Another point that Alan made that I really loved, that I think goes along with this spiritual disciplines and the need for this repetition within them, is this idea that, because you mentioned we see this through the Old Testament and even the New Testament, is this idea that it's not necessarily we need to learn the idea, or we don't need to, because we know it. We know it. We just need to remember it.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a beautiful, amazing point that Alan made there. Mostly, I think it's probably a really cool point because and Josh, you'll relate to this. We want to be right all the time. So we don't want somebody to tell us something and then us not to know it. Well, of course we know it. But it's like, oh, we've just forgotten it. Anyway, that just makes my ego feel better. So it's like there's so much stuff that it's like, it's not that I need to learn it for the first time. I just need to remember it. And these spiritual practices, like his practice of writing down what we would characterize as some of the most valuable things that he's learned in the Christian life, or these conversion moments that he's had, and then he prays through them every day, or he chooses one,
that's a cool practice.
That's an incredible practice. One in which I want to start taking up now, because that's the sort of thing that I want to do.
Just revisit those milestones with Jesus.
Yes.
Walk through those places with him and remember what he's done, what you've experienced, and how that's led you to where you're at now.
Exactly.
That's a very valuable practice, which I think leads great into these Inviso cards. So we've got the cover card here. So we've had these cards for like a month or so now?
Yeah, about.
And we've started using that. They come in a deck. I don't remember how many are in the deck, but it's like, I don't know, probably a couple dozen cards. And each one has a different picture on it. Like this one is a picture of what looks like a little kid staring out of a cave into the ocean. And the idea that they've got on the back of this card is longing. So on the back, it has this one word, longing, and then it has a few questions. A young child stands in a cave, gazing out from the darkness into the bright ocean scene before him. If this were you, what would you be thinking and feeling? What are you currently longing for? What dynamic emotion or action seems just beyond your reach? how might your longings drive you deeper into God's presence? And so the idea is you kind of work through this deck of cards. You can use them however you want. But like Chris mentioned, he kind of sets his on his desk, and it's one of the first things that he sees in the morning, and he's kind of called back to that thought. So as you would look at this card, you would just focus on this idea of longing and what longings are driving me deeper into God's presence. You can kind of feel what's going on in this image here as this kid's looking out into the ocean.
Can I talk about this one?
Yeah.
Because this has been the card that's been on my desk for probably 2 weeks now, and I haven't been able to move away from it.
Oh, yeah?
And so this has been by far my favorite. Number one, I just like the picture. I like it's completely framed in darkness with like a little ray of the endless sea staring out into it. And so again, it's a creative. There's an interpretation that can be given. And so like longing isn't necessarily the first word that comes to my mind, but it's really more it's freedom. This to me represented a longing for freedom of, in some cases feeling trapped in darkness all around, and yet being able to see out this small hole, sort of like a ray of hope, and that longing to, join in with all of the endless possibilities that the sea could offer me as far as, freedom. Like so it's been a longing for freedom. And so then that played itself out in, a couple of key ways in my life. And, there was a lot of, I've been very overwhelmed the last few weeks with just work and things at home. And so that's the way that this card has represented this longing for freedom in my life. And so, like if I'm sitting at my desk and I'm getting too worked up or too anxious, and I look over and it's sitting there next to my other computer monitor, it was a call back to center. That like I recognize what's going on in me. There's a longing there, a longing for freedom. And I don't have to be trapped in this darkness. And, maybe it's okay to sit there for a period or whatever of recognizing the reality that I'm in. But God's calling me to something more than that. I got to come out of the cave eventually. And so what does that look like? Anyway, and so then my mind, you just keep going. Okay, well, maybe it's scary. What happens when you get out of the cave? Because at least the cave can provide protection. It can provide shelter. The ocean is vast and, endless. How am I going to survive out there? Like there's all kinds of stuff that I think like this is literally, you're getting it, what this card has represented to me for the last 2 weeks. I've very, very much been contemplating that thing. And so I think these cards can be a really powerful tool for us to engage the inner depths of our hearts in a visual way that we don't usually go to.
So yeah, I think these are a great tool for use in just helping you think and pray and practice the way of presence. If you want, you can find a link in the show notes to the Unhurried Living website where you can purchase these. I think that's the only place to get them right now.
Yeah.
I think they're worth it. It's a neat little tool.
And they go great with the Daily Growth Journal, by the way.
They do. They go really well because the Daily Growth Journal is basically, what are you thankful for? What's God calling me to be? And it's just a call back to those things. And if you use this with those, man, that's a cool combo.
That's right. There's a whole page just to journal about that if you want.
So, Inviso cards, go check them out at the Unhurried Living website. Really great tool. On that note, when it comes to spiritual disciplines and spiritual practices for how can we live the way of Jesus, something like these Inviso cards are really just an opportunity for us to, like we were talking about, come back to what God's calling us to. We can get drawn away, like you were talking about, by our day, by the busyness of things that are going on, and we can be filled with longing for something that we're not experiencing right now. And so these spiritual disciplines, like whether it's gratitude or a daily office, reciting prayers from the Book of Common Prayer, praying with these Inviso cards, all of these things are reminders that pull us back toward Jesus and what he's doing in our lives. And really, it's about pulling us into his story, making us aware of what he's doing. We've talked about it before. So often we get so caught up in our own worlds that we forget we're part of God's story and what he's doing in the world around us. And when we flip that and we make ourselves the primary and him kind of a secondary actor in the story, it messes with our perspective on the world. We end up thinking things that are irrational. We think that the slightest little crisis is something that's major and it's going to be life-altering. We worry and we become really anxious. And I'm saying this, granted, I understand this is much easier to just say like I'm saying it than it is to actually do. But when we lose focus of God as the primary and us as the secondary in his story, things in our world become much more intimidating and they're stressful. They cause anxiety. I mean, look at 2020. 2020 has been 2020, and it will forever be in history 2020.
Yep.
But when we look at it through the lens of God's story, look at what he's doing. Granted, there have been some bad things, but what is he doing? And all of a sudden, these crises come into alignment with what he's doing in the world. And it doesn't mean that they're not bad things, but we have a different perspective on them. We have an awareness of his activity in the world around us. And that somehow makes things right. Like Alan talked about, the life that we're pursuing isn't going to be easy. And at times it's going to be filled with suffering and pain and things like that. But as we lean into that truth of Jesus and we become aware of the way that Jesus lived his life and we try to live the way that Jesus lived, coupled with the truth of Jesus, man, that life is incredible.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as we enjoyed having it. If you haven't listened to our conversation with Alan, click on the link down in the description and go listen to it. It will change your life. It will bless you. Man, the theme of this conversation, or that conversation in this video, I think is tools to help you practice the basics so that you can walk with God better as you are formed evermore into the image of Christ. So the number one tool for helping you become more like Christ is hitting the like button and subscribing to Daily Growth Discipleship. Obviously, I'm joking, but seriously, you guys should definitely like and subscribe. Click the bell icon to turn on notifications, get notified every time a video goes live. Guys, thank you so much for going on this journey with us as we strive to create a lifestyle of discipleship.